So essentially, what happened in the spring of 2021 was through the American Rescue Plan, $800 million was set aside to serve students experiencing homelessness. Of that 800 million, 30 million, approximately 30 million came to our state. It was distributed in two buckets in two different ways. The first allocation, about 7 million, went out and was supposed to go out very quickly. So the requirements for that would be that it was competitive, but it was offered to districts that had knowledge of how to spend McKinney-Vento dollars. So we, as our state, was also convening the McKinney-Vento subgrant competition. We're in a good position to know those who were versed in how to spend the funds, because we had 20 grantees at that point, and we had many others who were applying for the next fiscal year's grant dollars. So everyone who had applied for the McKinney-Vento grant that competitive year was eligible for the ARP Homeless 1 or HCY 1. The feds use HCY and Ohio uses Homeless 1. So I will use those interchangeably. At any rate, so we had a good pool of applicants already at the ready, and we ended up awarding 30 grantees the American Rescue Plan Homeless $1. Those dollars were to be used immediately to support summer learning and support the learning loss that may have occurred during COVID. The dollars are good until September 30, 2024, and they are still being spent down by the grantees. Secondly, the second bucket of dollars is about 12 million, and that went out differently. It went out to all districts in the state of Ohio, and it was based on their Title I formula as well as their number of students experiencing homelessness. The one caveat in the American Rescue Plan Homeless $2 was if your allocation was less than $5,000, you had to join a consortium. So that took a little bit longer for the distribution to occur, but it is all worked through. We have our grantees, and some of them are in consortia. Some districts did choose to forfeit their funds rather than join a consortia. But we are positioned right now with both buckets of money being out and available for districts to use. Okay, so this is a little bit of data from our school year 2021 that shows about 21,000 students experiencing homelessness and the categories that they fit in per their nighttime status. And I share this slide just to help you understand that one of the allowable uses in the targeted uses of these American Rescue Plan dollars is to identify. So we know that this number is less than it was pre-COVID, the total number of students experiencing homelessness. And likely a lot of our families were displaced from their doubled up situation because, as you all know, being cooped up in a home during COVID was enough for one family, let alone multiple families in one setting. So it's important to note that our families that are experiencing homelessness typically end up with another household. And identification is hard. And it was real hard during the COVID time because we didn't see our students in brick and mortars. So the dollars can be used to support identification processes and procedures to, again, support that population, the doubled up population. We also have the other categories are students sheltered, unsheltered, hotel, and motel. On this slide, we also include the number of students unaccompanied youth that is on the rise in the state of Ohio per my technical assistance calls. And it's important to note that in 2015, when McKinney-Vento was reauthorized, there were some additional provisions put in to support our unaccompanied youth, and I just like to highlight in that so that we're paying attention to our youth. Unaccompanied youth does not know an age range, but the provisions were particular to our high school students and making sure that they have a plan for success, that if they choose or desire to go into higher education, someone is helping them fill out the FAFSA. And even that they know that there is an eligibility opportunity through being an independent student on that FAFSA form. And then we also have preschool included here because it's important to note that preschoolers were captured in the school of origin provision. And now if a student is enrolled, a preschooler student is enrolled in attending a public preschool at the onset of a homeless experience, they are entitled to that return to school of origin and transportation. We also want to stress the importance of capturing preschool students in, if we identify a family and they have preschoolers who aren't enrolled, that we would do everything we could to encourage them to get their young student enrolled, knowing that that alleviates what the student is doing during the day. If we can get them in education setting, it can help the family get on their feet at a greater rate or sooner. This is just some demographic data that's important, again, to keep in mind when we're trying to be culturally sensitive to how we're disseminating information, the language that we're using, etc. So again, this is state level data. I encourage when I'm doing trainings that every district would look at their district level demographic data and drill down to their students experiencing homelessness. This is the captures the graduation rate for our students in foster care and also our students experiencing homelessness. You can see that we lag well behind all students, and this is a need. So when you're thinking of how to spend your funds, targeting this population again would be helpful. There are districts that have chosen to do audits of their students experiencing homelessness, credit audits, and they have found that a lot of times credits haven't transferred and haven't been accounted for because students tend to be very transient. Records may get transferred, may not get transferred in a timely way, and more importantly, some of the credits weren't showing. And so they found it very beneficial to give a stipend to somebody to work and do some auditing of their high schoolers. So that's a consideration as well. And then here's another statistic just to keep in mind, the rate of our students experiencing homelessness and their chronic absenteeism. We know that it's hard when you're living in a doubled up situation where the majority of our students are. And things that we can do is have sensitive conversations, figure out what is the barrier to coming to school. And sometimes it can be that they can't get into the bathroom in the morning to get their hair done and things like that. So we, or their clothes laundered because there's so many under the same roof. So we have found that many districts have created spaces for their students to come to school a little bit early and get ready if that is the barrier to attendance. Some districts have chosen to create a space for laundry facilities, etc. So really sharing this statistic again so you could drill down at your district level and determine what are the barriers to attendance and try to remove them, again, through the use of these funds. And then this last piece of data just shows again that our students experiencing homelessness and on IEPs is great. Not as many as in foster care, but nonetheless, this just stresses the importance of, again, that immediate enrollment, immediate attendance, and making sure that records are transferred in a timely way. So if there's not a seamless system in place in your district to ensure that, again, that's another thing these dollars can be used for, is somebody's time and effort to figure out the best way to provide those seamless services for our students. Okay, so some of the funding priorities for these dollars are identifying, as I've said, providing the wraparound services needed. And that's the interesting part of these dollars, is they've expanded what was allowable for supporting students experiencing homelessness to add some other extraordinary and not typical uses of the dollars. And we can talk about those as I go through the slides. Okay, so we really, the dollars were intended to figure out how we can recover our students from the pandemic, find them, and make sure that they can fully participate. Okay, and as you know, that there were a lot of other impact aid funds sent to the state and to your district. It's hopes that these dollars, the homeless dollars, would be used in conjunction with your American Rescue Plan ESSER and other ESSER 1, ESSER 2 funds. So the idea is that our American Rescue Plan, or ESSER 1, ESSER 2, called out supporting homeless students in the allowable uses. And then the American Rescue Plan homeless funds expand beyond what you could use your ARP ESSER dollars with. So you want to make sure you're using those dollars and then using the supplemental American Rescue Plan homeless dollars in that order. So you have what you need to serve the population well. Okay, there's also a requirement that you look at the historically underserved populations, and you're strongly encouraged to support them with these dollars as well. Okay. Again, just reiterating, the funds are used to facilitate what's needed to ensure education is occurring, summer programs, remediation and acceleration and enrichment. Really an opportunity to think big. We've not had this kind of money in the state to serve students experiencing homelessness. It's not clear if we ever will again. So it's really, really important that you would do a needs assessment and use your dollars in a way that will sustain supporting the students beyond the dollars. So things like staffing, using time and expertise. Transportation, we know, is a costly expense that occurs when students experience homelessness. You may use your dollars for this. And we also understand that that's a challenge with our driver shortage. You are cautioned, but you can use these dollars for short-term housing, such as 1 to 3 nights in a hotel. Again, the caution is use it, but use it to connect the family to the housing entity in the community, the COC. And I know that Lisa Borden is here, and she is part of that initiative. So I think you'll be talking about that a little bit more. So the 1 to 3 nights that's allowable hotel stay is just intended to get the student and the family in a safe space until you can get them connected to the housing space that can support, extended housing needs. Another one of the allowable uses is store cards, prepaid cards. The feds don't like using gift card as a name, so hence store cards and prepaid cards. Those are allowable, again, noting that sometimes the needs these families have are immediate, and going through the process of getting dollars to a family through your typical process in the district can be lengthy. So having some store cards and prepaid cards on hand for emergency use is allowable. You just want to make sure you have a great system were you to be audited. Okay. Okay, again, some other allowable uses and of these funds would be for contracted services, tutoring, extra time for staff, again, to create systems of communication and support. And then salary and benefits, professional development. We know that sometimes, we know it's a requirement that all staff be trained, but we also know that there's more than just knowing the law that our staff can be trained in. So trauma sensitive PD is recommended, and these dollars can be used for that. Can be used for adapting space, again, general supplies, and also indirect costs. Okay, I just like to highlight that our state has set aside money from the American Rescue Plan to contract with the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio. And they have created a community of practice for you to join. The intention is, again, for them to beef up our state level PD, provide a forum for you to have additional conversation and learn more about how to support students experiencing homelessness. It's also an ideal opportunity to connect to the community providers using the homelesseducation@cohio.org email address. When you have a family and you've met their education needs, got them immediately enrolled, and then want to connect them with community resources, you can send an email to the team at Cohio, telling them the number of students in the family, the needs, and they will send you the county resources. They're also provide a quarterly newsletter, which I hope if you haven't signed up, please do so to get that, as well as they're working on an e-learning platform that will be available in the near future. Okay, we have also a new and improved McKinney-Vento website, so I encourage you to check that out. It's a little better organized. We have some buttons, and I hope you find it easier to navigate and get the supports that you need in your roles in supporting students experiencing homelessness. Another great place to get great ideas for how to use these dollars is through Schoolhouse Connection. This website has divided best practices or featured districts in all these categories here. And Ohio is listed in many of the categories as having innovative ideas supporting students experiencing homelessness. So I encourage you to check that out as well. Additionally, in the chat, the ladies are going to put our American Rescue Plan targeted support grant. My colleague Ashley Heiser has been working to inform districts. There's 3 eligible applicants: Head Start, which is probably any of you, JVSDs, Joint Vocational School Districts, as well as what we're calling low incidence districts. That would be districts that identified fewer than 10 students experiencing homelessness. And in the chat, you can see the districts in Stark County that are eligible for that targeted support grant. It is due on December 30th. It is a very easy application, 2 questions, and it's for $10,000. So if you are not aware of it, please take a moment and take this information. Sometimes your barrier is access to the CCIP. If you can find the person in your district who has access to the CCIP, and you know the needs of your students experiencing homelessness, you could join together. Somebody could write it and somebody could put it in the CCIP. It really is a great opportunity, again, to support our students and to have some additional funds. We know that the hardship has occurred. The COVID, we're working our way out of it, but there tends to be a ripple effect when any kind of major hardship occurs. I know for myself, I came to the state in 2012, which was 4 years after the housing crisis of 2008. But the gentleman that I took over for was telling me that that's what we were experiencing in 2012. We were still experiencing the impact of 2008. So just giving you a perspective of why these dollars are important, why it's important to keep being proactive, even if you have a low number of students experiencing homelessness. We hope it stays that way, but we don't want to be naive to the fact that it might not. Okay, so this is just an opportunity to use some funds that wouldn't otherwise be available to figure out systems of support. So I will stop talking and see if there's any questions or comments. And thank you again.
Thank you, Susanna. We really appreciate it. In your agenda, there is a link to her presentation that she's shared with us. And there's also a link to an ODE chart on allowable expenses. And if you guys have any questions for Susanna, she's agreed to stay and answer a few. So. Victoria has asked, Canton Local has a CET consortium program with other area schools rather than having a relationship with our JVSD. Could the application for funding be extended to their program?
Victoria, I don't know the answer to that, but it would be worth contacting Ashley to ask her if that's something that could be extended. Reshow the last slide.
Also, if you click on the agenda, the presentation is linked there, so you'll have the slides to take with you as well, if that helps.
Did you want I can show the.
Thank you.
I think if it was the Schoolhouse Connection best practices, I just put the link there. So.
Thank you.
Hey, we have a quiet group.
Yeah, now is the time for questions if anyone has any about how they can use their funds or what's allowable. I have a question. Could you expand more on like contracted services? Like what are the limits on using contracted services? Does that include like one of our districts employs a housing navigator through a local nonprofit? Is that what we're talking about there?
Yeah, any community partner that would support the work could be a contracted service. We know, I know of some districts that have a half-time, their employees half-time district, half-time in the housing entity, but that's not always conducive to have that one person, but it could be two people working together in collaboration. So the liaison and somebody in the other space. So.
Sorry, go ahead.
Can that be used to support your family support specialists as well? If they're in charge of seeking out our homeless students and finding them and connecting them?
Right. So you want to be mindful of how you're doing that. If you're expanding her responsibilities, that would make sense.
Okay.
That's a great question. And Kathy, you had your hand raised.
Hi, I apologize for being late, and I apologize if you've already questioned this, but I have two families that I'm very worried about right now. Actually, I have a lot of them, but these two in particular. One of them is actually homeless and classified as homeless. And the guy in the family recently got hurt at work. And so they are likely to be put out the 21st. And she's not been able to find any kind of home. And my other one is just out of money and isn't working and is going to be put out as well. A lot of people that I work with ask for first month's deposits, rent money to get them through, et cetera. And I know this isn't sustainable, but sometimes the big barrier is that large amount of money they have to put down at the beginning of their rentalship. Are there any resources I can point them to?
Yeah, it wouldn't be the American Rescue Plan funds you could use for deposits and things like that, but that would be an email you could send to the homeless education at cohio.org. And they could provide you with the resources. It's another opportunity, and I know probably preaching to the choir, Kathy, but I'll just say for everybody, like being proactive with your faith-based entities and say, you know, this is a need, this is a barrier. How do you think you could support this? And, you know, nationally, it's been years since I've heard this idea, but it was the faith-based community came together and said a dollar amount that they would be willing to be available for emergency uses. So having that system already in place, and you could go to that, you know, that faith-based entity and say, what, you know, who is willing to put $500, you know, or, you know, to get.
We are working with our faith-based community. We have a ministerial association that rebooted this year. And I've asked them, I said, you know, I have 45 of you on this email. If each of you put in $100, which is a small amount for a church generally, we would more than have this covered. So we're working with it. It hasn't worked yet. And half of the issue is not finding funding. The other half is helping the families that aren't very good at navigating no matter what we do with them. So this is just a frustrating thing with these two families. So thank you.
Yeah, understood. But thank you for hanging in there and keep being resourceful, because that's a common story. Lots of years.
We had a couple other questions in the chat about finding or knowing how much funding they have, which it looks like Victoria found it. But for anyone else who might be looking for how to find out how much funding they have.
You mean your district?
Yes, by district.
Okay. Well, it is available, publicly available in the CCIP. I think at one point I did have a Stark County. I had figured that out when I was talking to you guys. I don't have it pulled up.
Okay.
But yeah, so if you know your Title I coordinator, typically they're the people in the district that could tell you that. It would make sense that you would know that if you're the boots on the ground working with the families, because you know the needs. So asking that question is certainly seems acceptable to find out how much and how the dollars are budgeted. Yeah.
And then Nicole asked if you could expand more on paid internship ideas. Have you seen this used and in what capacity?
So internship, was that on the slide, or is that an idea that we heard?
Nicole, could you
Mute? I'm sorry.
mute and
Yeah, I mean,
It was in
staff, go ahead.
Susanna. It was in the slide. It was one of the ideas. It was just maybe a few slides ago, and it was talking about ways that you could use money, and it said paid internship.
Right. So if you're college, or, you know, if there's a way, again, to get, the idea is so people would say, we don't want to hire people and get them benefits and everything because the money's running out, right? So that's the barrier. So the opportunity is to look for another way to hire somebody that's not going to put the district in that position. Does that make sense? So like an internship would be, or that stipend idea, somebody who's maybe not paid through the summer or wants to work a little extra. That was how the one district did the credit audit, was just paid somebody extra hours, things like that. That's to offset that barrier that we often hear with money has a limited time. Is that helpful? Okay, good question.
Are there restrictions on what like those contracted services or paid internships, what their role has to be defined as?
Well, I mean, it has to be within, again, supporting identification, retention of students experiencing homelessness and meeting their needs. And you want to be cautious in making sure that everything that you're doing is tying back to keeping the students in school, right? So there's, you could see there's some of the allowable uses go a little bit beyond academic, but we always want to keep it focused in the education space. So if that's helpful in answering that question, just want to tie it to school success, everything we're doing. Anything else? I want to find my Stark County spreadsheet. I'm trying to find it. Okay, I have it up. So if people want to ask, I can tell you if there's specific districts that are curious. I found the spreadsheet and I pulled it up. So was that Victoria and she found it already?
Yes, I found it my CCIP, but I just always, I understand that this is wonderful information, but we got $1,000 in funding. That's not going to go very far in a hotel voucher, or I don't understand. Is this as underfunded, or are we misrepresenting our numbers and we should be getting more? I've always wondered.
So tell me what's your district, Victoria? Do you mind?
Canton local.
Okay. Canton local, I have $17,551.
Okay, I'm just looking in the round 2. Okay, so I'm looking at the wrong place in the funding source in the CCIP then.
Yeah.
Okay,
So-
I'll continue to dive into it a little bit more.
Yeah, and you very well, that could be what's left. Maybe a lot was spent down.
Okay.
I'm looking at a spreadsheet I did probably last spring. So to answer your question, though, I mean, that's not a lot of money even compared to some of the others. And it is based, so that bucket of money was based on your Title I formula, as well as the number of students experiencing homelessness. So I don't know what your title dollars look like, but that impacts the amount. And to your point, we know that a lot of students are not being identified properly, families, because there's a lot of shame and stigma. So we want to find ways to sensitively find out our families that are experiencing a hardship and focus on, we identify them, but not to stigmatize them, but to get them the support. And in this case, it would have yielded more dollars if you really believe you have more.
I appreciate that, Susanna. I think I need to have a conversation with my Title I coordinator to find out where those monies, because if I'm running the program for here, I probably should know where those are going. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's always a challenge and an opportunity when I meet and I hear that people aren't aware of the dollars that are supporting. So it's a good time to, be diplomatic about it and find out.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
And that's exactly why this learning community is so valuable, because homelessness and housing is like this much of what school districts are responsible for, right? And so these kind of dollars and strategies often get lost amongst all the other work you do.
Mm-hmm.
And so how we kind of support each other is so valuable, and identifying those students so that you get it into your data. So this is a great conversation.
Hannah asked, from a community health worker perspective, after hotel vouchers are provided, where are they going to go after those few days when our shelters are almost always full?
So I don't know, and I don't know if there's others on the call that might be able to respond to this, but my understanding is that a lot of the shelters at one point were using hotels as overflow spaces. And so the idea would be to communicate with the shelter and say, we have this family in need. They're in X hotel, or even prior to putting a family in a hotel, finding out what the overflow space that the shelters use, so that you would use that hotel. So that's one less move that family would have to make. I wish I had answers for all these problems. Sometimes that 1 to 3 can be enough time to also allow the family to find another family to let them live with them. So like there's multiple ways that 1 to 3 can be helpful. Go ahead, Lisa. I saw you come on.
So I'll just speak briefly about the overflow shelters. Stark County at this time has not determined the need to go into overflow shelters. We do monitor that through the winter months. We do have courtesy stays at our shelters should a situation arise on the weekend when, for example, the homeless hotline is not available and you do find someone that is literally homeless. So we are piloting that right now with the city of Canton, just to make sure that, you know, if the police department finds someone that's on the street, they have somewhere to take them. So we do have pilots going on for things like that. We do keep in touch with all of the city agencies, to the city governments, to find out what, you know, their plan is for warming centers and when those things open up. And so that's something that we do try to keep on top of. But I just wanted to answer the part about the overflow hotels. That is not in place right now. There was some of that going on during COVID just to be in preparation. Should shelters be at capacity due to the distancing that was required in some instances. But at this time, there are no overflows going into hotels. One thing that I do want to tap into about hotel stays, if a hotel stay is being paid for by an agency, including a school, just make sure that is documented, because it is different if a family is doing self-pay. So you'll want to make sure that it's documented that it's being paid for by an agency. And then at that point, when they're calling the hotline, they would be considered at that imminent risk or literally homeless. So that's something you're going to want to make sure is documented as you're talking with the families. In addition, I know that Job and Family Services works very well with our homeless navigation system. So if you do have a family with children and they're in a hotel, Job and Family Services, if the family is waiting on shelter and they called the hotline and they're registered with the hotline, they will pick up that hotel stay until we can get them into shelter. So just wanted to put that out there as well.
Thank you, Lisa, for that additional information. And I will say, over Thanksgiving, I had 2 calls, and they were urgent. That was one. They discovered a family staying in a car the day before school was letting out for Thanksgiving break. And the reality was they needed more than 3 nights. So that is an extraordinary emergency. That's what can be documented. And then they were able to provide those additional nights until school was back in session that following Monday. In another district, found a family getting ready to be evicted from the hotel that they could no longer afford, and they were able to extend that again through the Thanksgiving break and up until that Monday. So there are exceptions to the 1 to 3. I appreciate Lisa sharing that Job and Family Services is also the resource. So hopefully that's enough to support some of the families you're supporting.
Another question was, is it harder for single fathers with children to have access to homeless shelters? Which I think, yes, that is the consensus. I don't know, Lisa or Susanna, if you would like to speak to that, if you have any information.
We do have family shelters in Stark County. So if the father is the head of household and he has minor children, there is absolutely places that he can be referred to within Stark County. They are not, it is not just women and children shelters. We do have family shelters. And one other thing I would like to add, just in case there's anyone that maybe has a misconception of what shelters are, most of the Stark County shelters, with the exception of the Refuge of Hope, which is primarily for single males, the rest of our shelters are private rooms. So the families have their own room. They're not congregate cell settings. So people have their own rooms. So just, I just kind of wanted to put that misconception out there, just so that, you kind of understand how our shelters operate in Stark County. And when I share my slides, there will be some information about our homeless navigation system. And there are numbers on there that you can call as well if you have additional questions about that.
Thanks, Lisa. Are there any other questions for Susanna? All right. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. I'm probably going to stay on just to hear the rest of the presentation because I love learning, especially about the housing space. So thank you all for having me. I appreciate all that you're doing, and please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Carol Popa. She's with EMIS and Spark, and she's going to talk a little bit more about reporting. Are you here already, Carol?
Yes, I am here.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Boy, that's going to be a tough act to follow, is following someone from ODE, but I will try my best. I want to also thank Christina and Patty. They did ask me if I'd be willing to speak regarding EMIS and the reporting of students who are determined to be homeless and or unaccompanied youth. So this isn't a real long presentation, but almost all of it, just about all of it, is out of the EMIS manual. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see my presentation. And I think I'll probably be like Susanna. I will not be able to view the chat as well. So if someone can monitor that, just let me know. So thank you again for asking me to do this. I do want to thank, I have two of the Spark EMIS team members here on the call, Terry Lynn Heslip and Sherry Shields. And they agreed to let me know if I get anything wrong. So I'm feeling a little under the weather, which is why my camera is off. But I will do the best I can. So EMIS reporting, when it comes to EMIS, it touches so much of a school district's data that I do fully enjoy sharing whatever knowledge I may have about EMIS reporting with the various pieces of data. For example, we did EMIS and English learners earlier this year. We did EMIS and gifted. So again, I really appreciate this opportunity. So like I said, I do pretty much get a lot of my information from the EMIS manual. So part of the first couple slides are going to be about EMIS elements. So in this situation, the homeless status. So the definition, which of course you all here in attendance are the homeless liaisons. So you already have hopefully a very good understanding of this, but an EMIS note as far as homeless status, it is collected in the mid-year and final student collections. So when it comes to EMIS and the data that ODE collects, there are three main student collections. There's a beginning of year collection, which is what we're in currently, and that ends on, I believe, somewhere around December 19th. So right now, whatever coding you are doing of homeless in your student information system, it is not in the data collector side of things yet, but it will be the mid-year here that I referred to. The mid-year opens, I believe, on January 2nd. So that's a little bit about the student collection. The valid options when it comes to this homeless status, of course, the default for most of your students are going to be not applicable. And then I did include each of the options on this slide too, as well as the following slide. And these are the only options that are permitted to be reported to EMIS as far as the homeless status. The EMIS data, since there's so much data that ODE collects, it's sort of divided into record types. So the homeless status record type is an FD record. What this is basically saying, the reporting instructions here, is that the FD record is a date-driven field. So you can have effective start and end dates at any point during a school year. So someone maybe who began the year with not applicable and was not determined to be homeless, maybe their situations changed during the year, and they would have to end the one valid option and start another one. There's a little more on that too. And then, of course, here, all homeless students must have a primary nighttime residence classified into one of these four categories. A long, long time ago, and I've been doing EMIS for quite some time, I do remember when Susanna started back in, I didn't know the year, but I guess it was 2012. I do remember that. And I don't know if it was that time or it might have even been before that. There was an option of other or unknown for one of these options that we just went through. So that is no longer available. If someone's determined to be homeless, those are your options here on the slides 2 and 3. Now, unaccompanied youth, this is a separate element. So ODE collects this separately. And I'll also, as I said, I've been doing EMIS for a long time, and I believe they used to be one and the same. They separated those two elements quite a few years ago, because they discovered that there are times, just because someone's homeless does not mean they're unaccompanied youth. Just because they're unaccompanied youth does not necessarily mean they're homeless. So as it was in for the homeless element, this as well, unaccompanied youth, is also collected in the mid-year and final student collections. Now this one, the valid options is a simple yes and no. But the definition by ODE is a student who is not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. So down here in the reporting instructions, it does give an example that students who meet that definition can be limited to, but not necessarily, youth living in runaway shelters, abandoned buildings, cars, the streets, or other inadequate housing. Youth denied housing by their families, sometimes referred to as throwaways. So I know, unfortunately, it seems like as the years go by, I think districts do see a little more of that. And then school age unwed mothers who live in homes for unwed mothers and have no other housing available. So I included that because I thought these were really good examples. And then here's something else. Initially, when I met with Patty and Christina, they had talked about unaccompanied youth and homeless as it pertains to English learners. So I did find this first paragraph here. The definition of an unaccompanied youth may include children who are awaiting immigration proceedings while residing with a parent, family member, or other adult sponsor. So that is not out of the EMIS manual. Most of the rest of this is. I found that somewhere also on ODE's website. Students meeting the definition of unaccompanied youth, but not homeless. And they give some examples of that too. It could be students who are living with a family friend or a relative. And again, unfortunately, I think school districts see a lot more of that than they may be perhaps used to many years ago. In this example, this absence is not related to a hardship, but rather is an event that has been planned. So support and care is in place so the student may stay to finish the education. Again, this unaccompanied youth is part of the FD record. So because of that, it's a date-driven field, just like the homeless status. And you can have changes in that value as the school year goes on. Okay, so another part that I wanted to show, we, as Spark, we do support districts that use 2 different student information systems. And the first one is student information, which will forever be in many people's minds, referred to as Dazzle. And I wanted to include a snapshot of where this can be found. So here's the breadcrumb trail. If you bring a student up in context and you want to see what the homeless status or the unaccompanied youth and those valid options we just went over, this is where you can find those values in Dazzle if you're a Dazzle district. And then we also have many of our districts using eSchool Plus, Power School, and they kind of, whereas Dazzle has these on the same screen, it's on the FD tab. eSchool does have it on 2 different places. So here's the breadcrumb trail of the first one, is to go from registration to student demographic to the personal screen. And this again allows for a date-driven field. There can be open or closed throughout the school year. Now, the other piece of the unaccompanied youth that we've been talking about in eSchool, this is the other breadcrumb trail. So this is a different place than where you're going to see the homeless. Now, hopefully, as the homeless liaisons, you all know this is in 2 different places. If not, you could certainly talk with your EMIS coordinator. EMIS coordinators are very, very well versed in either system. But here's a homeless unaccompanied youth for eSchool. Oops, one too many. So school enrollment, I personally and the Spark team, we do a lot of training with the various modules of either system, of Dazzle or eSchool. So I personally do a lot of the registration training, and I work with a lot of the building secretaries. So I found this interesting. Again, this is not from the EMIS manual, but I found it out on ODE's website, so I felt really very comfortable with sharing this on the screens. But it's important to understand the school of origin versus the attendance area school. So the school of origin basically is where the student attended when they were last before they were determined to be homeless. The attendance area school would be the school where the student is residing if they are not attending the school of origin. So say they were determined to be homeless and they choose to attend the new district where they live. So federal law does require that a student remains enrolled in the school of origin while the schools and districts are confirming their eligibility. So while you guys as the homeless liaisons are reviewing the situation, the student should remain enrolled in the school of origin. They want to do that because they feel that ensures a student has stability with their education. Now, that being said, in some cases, however, the student may be immediately enrolled in the attendance area school, which is the new district it could be the new district where the student is sleeping at night. I did underline the final school selection decision does remain with the student and his or her family. And that is something we do cover when we do registration training with the building secretaries. Homelessness, of course, is not an acceptable reason. If someone becomes homeless, that does not mean it's a reason to withdraw them from that school of origin. Now, continuing with school enrollment, this is really important. And again, we go over this in registration training. Homeless students should not be denied enrollment because they cannot produce documentation that normally your district would require. So every district should have the board policy as to what they require when a student is admitted to their school. But if a student is determined to be homeless and cannot, let's say for whatever reason, provide a copy of the birth certificate or proof of residency, that type of thing, that none of that should hold up registration for a student. And then this is really, I think, something that is very good to know. If a homeless student finds permanent residency at some point during the school year that's outside of the district where he or she is enrolled, that student must be allowed to finish out the school year in that district. So that is, again, from the EMIS manual. Excuse me. Bits and pieces of this are from the EMIS manual. And we have had that question come across our Spark help desk. So I thought that would be something nice to share. If you don't already have a meeting or participate possibly in a meeting with building secretaries, oftentimes they're kind of the first ones, especially when they're enrolling new students. They may be the first ones, and I tell them this, that that are provided with some of the most information. Now, sometimes that's not the case, but sometimes someone may want to come in new and tell their history to the building secretary. And I have told them often that it is not their job to determine whether the student's homeless or not, or unaccompanied youth, but it is their job to bring that to the attention of the homeless liaison. So if you haven't been involved in a building secretary meeting, sometimes I know there's EMIS coordinators that will hold a meeting with their building secretaries, especially the registration folks, like once or twice a year. You may want to even ask your EMIS coordinator, hey, do you have a meeting scheduled for the spring? And I think that's really good. Some of the information that Susanna went over here was really interesting to hear outside of the lens of EMIS. So I think it would also be good to make sure you're touching base with those building secretaries, because if the information never makes it to you, you could be missing some. So excused absences, that is a reason that schools may excuse an absence if they're going through a period of homelessness. So make sure, again, your attendance secretaries, make sure they might be aware of that. And then this is something, county of residence. So this is something that is reported to ODE, and it's actually part of the casino count, which was from years ago. So the county of residence is collected by ODE, I believe, twice a year, like fall and spring-ish. If a student is homeless and does have an established residence, so if they're either in a homeless shelter or perhaps if they're in a doubled up situation with family or friends, so the county of residence that should be reported should be where the student is homeless. So we did just go over this recently with the EMIS coordinators. They are aware of that, but I wanted to throw that in there so that you're aware that that is something that's collected by ODE. And then transportation, hopefully many of you know this. This is direct from the EMIS manual. Districts are required to provide transportation to and from. And what I usually have heard from conferences, I've been through EMIS conferences in the past over the years. I think ideally ODE would want both districts to work together, if there's two districts involved between the district they had attended previously and the one they're attending. If they're attending a new one, they want to play nice and share the cost equally. So you folks are probably more involved and know a little more about that than I do, but this is from the manual. And this, I did want to throw a couple more things in. So a suggestion would be check to see if students coded as homeless are coded with an EMIS disadvantage element. So what I mean by that is free and reduced. So is your district using the meal status of free? If as a homeless liaison, you should know, hopefully, who in your district is responsible for coding that free and reduced, because when a student is free or reduced, that is tied to the disadvantagement element for EMIS. Something else, of course, if you haven't already thought about it, if you're new to the homeless liaison position, if your district has school fees, those should be waived. And then I am going to use this presentation our next meeting with the EMIS coordinators, since I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk to them about it. But if you work with your EMIS coordinator, ask them for a list of the students coded as homeless or then unaccompanied youth. Now, back in those early slides, the homeless status, if they go into the data collector, which is what I always recommend, they go directly in the data collector instead of in Dazzle or eSchool. If they're pulling it out of Dazzle or eSchool, there's always a chance that a search may miss someone. So what Susanna went over and what ODE is basing funding on and the numbers that make it to ODE, they're getting it from the data collector, not from, indirectly they're getting it from your student information system. But to really make sure that everyone is coded, that you think is coded, the best thing is to go into the data collector, ask them to pull a file. Now, unfortunately, if you remember way back when, the homeless and unaccompanied youth are not being collected quite yet. It's going to start in the mid-year. So that's early January 2nd or 3rd, right around there. You could ask for a list of any students that have a value other than, asterisk or no in those fields. And the other thing I usually try to call the attention of EMIS coordinators, another purpose to get that list is generally those two values, the homeless and unaccompanied youth, they're going to roll from year to year. So they're going to roll over into your system. So whatever it was last year is likely what's in there now, if you have not already looked at that. So it doesn't mean the situation has stayed the same. And I'm sure Susanna could add to this, but I would think that the homeless liaison should be reviewing the students at least on an annual basis to see if their situation has changed when a new school year starts. So that was kind of what the EMIS suggestions were all about. Now, something else I wanted to add, this cross-check, if you have not yet heard about it, your EMIS coordinator, the Spark districts anyway, the EMIS coordinators are the one who are in charge of granting access roles. And there's not a whole lot yet for homeless, but they do have this under the district building dashboard. Every single district has this, and it has homeless students where it goes into the total number of students and total educated students. So that's something that, again, you can work with your EMIS coordinator and get those numbers, see if it looks right. Now, I pointed to this, and I also pointed this little eye up here for information. So the next slide on 15 is just describing this displays several subgroups of students as a percentage. So when it talks about subgroups, if you look at these here, and I had mentioned we did EMIS and English Learner earlier in the fall, we did EMIS and Gifted after that. Disadvantaged, we talked about that briefly today about the free and reduced. homeless and students with a disability. These become subgroups in EMIS land, in ODE. So it's really important that I think that as a homeless liaison, that you may want to know what that is. That is what I had as far as from an EMIS lens when it looks at homeless. And again, this was very interesting to hear it from another side and what you all go through. So I applaud each of you for doing this for your districts, because it's obviously a very important feature.
Thanks, Carol. I appreciate it. Just keep in mind that the data collection is very important to what we were talking about earlier. It impacts your funding, and you need to make sure that those records are kept up to date and they're accurate. There was a question in the chat from Kathy regarding if students are couch surfing, and correct me if I'm wrong, any of you who have more expertise, but that person would be designated as both homeless and unaccompanied if they're not staying also with their family at that person's home. And Susanna added in the chat, the eligibility needs to be revisited each year prior to the start of the school year, and that there's multiple check-ins as well. And just so we stay on time, we're going to go ahead and get Lisa started. She's with the Stark Housing Network, previously with Canton City Schools, so I'm sure many of you know her. And if you have questions for Carol, please put them in the chat, and we can either get answers today if she's available or at another time.
And Christina, I'm happy to present now since I'm in a good place. I was not sure if I would be back in my office, so I wanted to make sure I had another option. So
great, thank you.
Maybe. Maybe, Christina, I'm going to have to ask you to help. For some reason, it's not popping up for me. I apologize.
No problem.
Thank you. And Christina is also going to share this presentation with you, but I think with the audience that's on this call, you likely all know the definition of children experiencing homelessness under the McKinney-Vento Act, but I did pop that into the slide presentation and a resource to access that, as well as Susanna shared some great resources on the Ohio Department of Education. So all this information is there as well. And Carol also touched on some of these definitions as she was going through the EMIS, so we won't spend any more time on these. You can go to the next slide, Christina. Thank you. So some of the things that I just wanted to talk about, and as we're going through this, I would just encourage you to look at any potential gaps that you may see in your district, in your schools that you specifically work at, and who you might look to in your schools to kind of bridge some of these gaps as we're talking about the identification of students experiencing homelessness. So one of the things that I always like to start with is, do you have questions built into your school registration form for new and returning students? Is there a residency questionnaire in there that really addresses the McKinney-Vento Act and those living situations? So this is just an example of a residency questionnaire that was used in one of the school districts, and I believe this has been used in multiple school districts, especially for districts that have online registration. And so just something for you to take a look at within your local district. Next slide, please. And once you've gathered that information, do staff know what to do with the information? So if it is your school secretary or registrar and they've receive some of this information from a family, or a family has approached them, do they know what to do with the information and who to contact? Is there a flow chart or a written procedure within your district? And is that information located in a place that's easy for staff to access? So it's great that school districts have policies, but is it easy for your staff to access? Is it written in terms that they can understand and they know immediately what to do or how to refer those families? Next slide. And then in addition to your staff, do your students and your families know who to contact? Is there information posted on your website and in your school offices? Are there posters in areas where students and families enter, exit, and frequent your buildings? So there are free posters available. I've referenced a link here in this presentation for the National Center for Homeless Education, and there are free posters and materials available on that website. So if you do not have those in your school, those are things that you can easily access as well. It's really important that you keep these information and who families can contact, so that they have not only easy access to that information, but also feel empowered and have that privacy. They know who they can contact. They feel like they can access resources without having to share all their information to multiple people. Next slide, please. And then, are you aware of the resources available to help with building your toolbox to support identification and where to find those resources? So I just kind of popped up one of the resources that I found, a sample housing information form that was on the Ohio Department of Education, and that really user-friendly webpage that Susanna referenced earlier. It's very user-friendly, easy to access information. So in addition to the Ohio Department of Education, I also put links in there for the Schoolhouse Connection, which is a resource that Susanna referenced earlier, and then also the National Center for Homeless Education. All of these are great resources, great areas to go look for tools. I've always said, and in my past role as a homeless liaison, you don't have to recreate everything. Most things are out there that you can just download, add your school information to, or your district information to, and the tools have already been created for you. Next slide. The next slides are going to really focus on just some very brief information about the definitions of homelessness, and then the homeless navigation or the homeless hotline information for Stark County. I just wanted to share this information because I know that a lot of conversations come up around housing and how things, how families may access housing resources. So I'm just going to share a little bit of information with you. Next slide, please. So HUD, or the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, identifies literally homeless as in 4 categories. The homeless continuum of care of Stark County, or the homeless hotline, prioritize individuals in category 1 and category 4. And I'm not going to go through all these definitions, but this is something that you can access for yourself later. And the reason I bring this up is because you will see on the next slide, please, Christina. You will see that a majority of the students in schools that are identified as homeless fall into those doubled up, into that doubled up category, or families living with other families. And when folks call the homeless hotline, they're going to be prioritized based on that category 1 or category 4. The funding that comes into Stark County is designated to prioritize category 1 and category 4. So families that are in currently doubled up situations would not be on the top priority list to go into one of our homeless shelters, because they would not be considered literally homeless under the HUD definition. And I just wanted to call that to your attention, because sometimes that is a misconception. Next slide, please. So if you are working with a family that is at risk of being literally homeless. So those families that are temporarily living with family, friends, couch surfing, in self-paid motels, then you're just going to want to have some conversations with those families and just kind of find out if you can brainstorm with them, help them to kind of develop a plan to get them into a safe place, to stay in a safe place until they can access a housing plan. So if they have not applied for public housing, that is something that you could help them do through Stark Metropolitan Housing Authority. If they don't apply and get on the wait list, they're never going to be selected. So even though there are wait lists, we just recommend that you go ahead, help them apply for that housing, and so that they can, get started moving towards that housing plan or that future plan for housing. Also, you can look at some of the affordable housing options that are available. And I know on the agenda today is some information about Stark Help Central. So many of those lists are going to be available through that resource. And just really know the resources within your community or your reach for the school district that you're in to kind of help with guide these families in looking for a sustainable housing plan. Next slide, please. However, if you are working with a family who is literally homeless, so they're in a motel that's being paid by an agency, or they're in one of the other definitions of being literally homeless, this is the point that you are going to want to encourage the family to go ahead and call the homeless hotline, get put on that waiting list for shelter. And at many times, depending on their situation, they could be put into shelter that day. Our shelter capacity and stays change daily. And we also have to look at how that person is prioritized once they call into the hotline and they go through the assessment with our hotline. Depending on the person's situation and the way that questions are answered through our hotline, that can change where their priority is too, and where they fall in line. So that's something, if you are working with a family that's literally homeless, please encourage them to call the hotline and get put on our prioritization list. They can, there's more prioritization lists with our hotline than just emergency shelter. They can be put on a list for a rapid rehousing program or a permanent supportive housing program, depending on where they fall in their assessment. So it's just real important that we get them talking with our hotline and moving towards that housing plan. Next slide, please. This is just some guidance to give households when they're registering with the hotline. And again, Christina will share all of this information in her agenda. I think she's already put the link in there to this presentation. Next slide, please. And that's it. So thank you for your time today. I just wanted to really just call the attention to the importance of identifying students that are experiencing homelessness, working with these families, talking to them often. So I think it's just not enough that you have determined that the student is homeless, but what do you do with them next? Where do you link them to? How are you linking them to resources? Is there a team built within your school districts to have a confident person that these families can work with and talk to? Do you have a plan for that? Do you have a referral plan? As with the Homeless Continuum of Care, we cannot solve all of your housing problems. Contacting me to get someone into housing is not going to solve your problems. But what we want to do is just making sure that you're talking to these families often, that you're sharing resources that are available to them, and just help to get them in safe and stable places to stay. We know that nationally there is a housing shortage.
I think we might have lost Lisa.
I think she froze.
Yeah. Maybe we'll get her back here. There was a question from Hannah about prioritization. If someone's in a shelter, do they move up on the SMHA list? I'm not sure if Lisa will have the answer to that question or if that's One we'd have to go to SMHA about. If we get her back, we'll ask her that. And Susanna mentioned that there will be a toolkit from Ohio that will be coming out soon. I want to make sure we leave enough time for Brittany. She is sharing with us today about the transition of 211, and I'll give it over to you. Thanks for joining us, Brittany.
Thank you for having me. Hopefully you can hear me. Earlier, I was on a meeting and they couldn't hear me for a few minutes. I think you're shaking your head, so I think you're good. All right, so I just wanted to briefly, some of you may have already heard about our transition to that is currently undertaking through our 211 services. I cannot see you, so I will get chat to you as soon as I'm over my PowerPoint because it's blocking you guys all out. So here at the United Way, as of January 1st, we will no longer be having Stark County's 211 services. So what that means is the phone line, text messaging, and the 211 Stark database, so 211stark.org database, will all be closing as of the first of the year. And we will be transitioning our support and our partnership with starkhelpcentral.com. Along with many other community members. One of the reasons why we have determined to make this transition was that over the course of, honestly, the last 5 years, our call volume and web traffic to that 211 database have significantly decreased over the years. People and individuals have, I really honestly think COVID kind of shifted people to just go directly to services, and then also to do their own web searches rather than utilizing the 211 database. And so what we did find out, though, in our research over the last year is that starkhelpcentral.com is receiving on a monthly basis what we were seeing in a 2-month activity at 211. So Stark Help Central is obviously being utilized very well in our community. And so the United Way really wanted to stand behind Stark Help Central and have one localized resource and information webpage. We understand that obviously that does still, though, there is no void being filled in regards to the phone number. But what we can tell is that, and for those who aren't very 100% sure how 211 operated, 211 was in a sense kind of like, I like to describe it as a phone book. So you would be able to call into 211 24/7, be able to talk to a representative, express what your need is, and then they will just navigate the online database and provide a phone number. Then that caller would have to get off and disconnect that line and then call and follow up with that agency or provider that they were referred to. So we're just kind of eliminating that middle step, but we want to make sure that individuals know how to get to starkhelpcentral.com. We are partnering with a lot of different agencies. Obviously, why I'm on this call today is to have these conversations to make sure individuals know where to start pushing their clients. And if you're not aware, this is kind of what starkhelpcentral.com looks like. It is in the process of currently being updated. There will be, as of the first of the year, a kind of an updated face that will add a little bit more options and navigation options. But basically, it's a search engine. You just type in this top bar what service you're looking for or resource, and it will pull up a list. United Way will be partnering with StarkMar to keep and manage the resource is on this page up to date. And that is another benefit of kind of going to starkhelpcentral.com, as we can keep our management of the resources in-house comparatively to we were outsourcing that support previously. The other way that we are helping to kind of soften the community impact for closing the 211 phone line is we will be doing a direct mailing to our top area zip codes. So we have a list that was given to us by 211 currently of our most utilized zip code callers. And so they will get a targeted resource community resource guide. It kind of looks like the picture up on the screen. It's a little booklet that has the top 6 most requested services that have come in through 211 in this last year. Those are rent and utility assistance, homelessness, food, tax help, and also car repairs, so transportation. So we have put together this little resource guide. It is made available for you as well, and you will get a copy of the resource guides. There's 2. There's a booklet and a vertical version. The booklet is the printed version. And then the vertical is what I've been calling the bulletin board posting one. It's more of a page document. It's easier to look at. The booklet gets kind of crazy due to printing. And then also too, if you would like to request a quantity of the community resource guides because you did not receive them, or maybe you have some clients that you would like to have a stock on, I will pop a link up here in a second in the chat box that you can request those community resource guides as well. This is my contact information, so feel free to jot it down. If you have any specific questions or you want to make a specific request or you have some concerns, you can feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to answer and let you know how we're trying to plan to navigate around that. We know that one of the biggest concerns right now is just not having the call. And so we're going to do our best to see how that goes, I guess is the best way to say. I do kind of say very softly that the United Way has updated our main phone line. So if individual calls into our main phone line, they will get greeted by a call directory that could, in a sense, connect them to rent, housing, and food assistant calls. So it reroutes them directly to the provider. So they would call in. They would say, oh, hey, I live in Alliance and I need rent assistance. They'll hit that button and it would get them directly to, for instance, in that case, Salvation Army of Alliance, who provides our emergency assistant rental. So those are things that we are doing, but we wanted to just make sure the community at large is aware that as of the first of the year, 211 will not be accessible for Stark County. Carroll County and Tuscarawas County are both kind of in our little bubble. They are determining what they would like to do moving forward. I do believe right now Tuscarawas County will be continuing to have 211 at least for the next year. For 2023, Carroll County is also in the same capacity that they are going to probably try to keep 211 for at least 2023. So if they call in and their zip code is not supported, they'll just be told that 211 is not a service in their community. So just a kind of heads up of what they will. Also currently 211, all of our past users who have a phone line connected to their call-in are going to get a text message that tells them that 211 will be closing and push them to starkhelpcentral.com. And that's all I have. If anybody has any questions, like I said, you can pop it up or you can feel free to reach out to me as well.
Thank you, Brittany. I appreciate you being here and sharing that with us. Everyone's presentations are linked in the agenda. So if you need to go back and review anyone's contact information or any of the slides, that's all there for you. It's a live document with links to that printable resource guide. Also, Brittany's link to request a printed copy for any of your families. That is all there. And if anyone has any trouble with any of those links, just shoot me an email and I'll make sure you get the information that you need. Also on the agenda, and I'm going to put it in the chat now, is our attendance and evaluation link. If you could take a second, it's like 5 questions and fill that out. we want to make sure that we're bringing you the information that you need, and we are supporting you in the best way possible. So please give us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. And please reach out to Patty or I if you have any questions about any of the information today. And also in the agenda are our future dates. So on February 22nd and May 3rd, please mark your calendars and join us again. We appreciate your time today, and thank you to all of our presenters for being here and sharing your expertise. You all have a great day.